The single most powerful thing you can do for your aging brain isn't sold in a bottle, and you'll never see it advertised, because no one profits when you do it for free. That's the strange tension running through everything about brain health. The habits with the strongest evidence behind them get almost no airtime, while the ones with barely any evidence get sold to you every single day. In 2024, after weighing decades of research, a commission of the world's leading dementia experts landed on a striking conclusion: that close to half of all dementia cases could potentially be prevented or delayed, and not through anything exotic. It traces back to roughly a dozen everyday factors, most of them at least partly within your control, and 6 of those have especially strong science behind them. One in particular tends to blindside people, because it may be the biggest lever of all, and it has nothing to do with diet, genetics, or crossword puzzles. I should say up front that I'm not a doctor and none of this is medical advice, so if your memory genuinely worries you, that's a conversation to have with someone who can examine you. The best place to start is with the habit that doesn't just slow your brain's aging, but appears to reverse a part of it. Deep in your brain sits a small, curved structure called the hippocampus, roughly the size and shape of your thumb, and it's where new memories are physically laid down. Starting somewhere in your 40s, it begins to shrink, losing 1 to 2% of its volume a year. And for a long time, that slow erosion was simply accepted as part of getting old. Then, a study in 2011 tested whether it really had to be, asking one group of older adults to walk briskly a few times a week for a year, while a comparison group did nothing more strenuous than stretch. When the researchers scanned everyone's brains afterward, the contrast was hard to ignore. The people who had only stretched showed exactly the shrinkage the aging curve predicts, while the walkers had gone the other way entirely, growing their hippocampus by around 2%, and effectively winding back a year or two of decline in the very structure that holds memory. All driven by a protein the body releases during exercise that behaves something like fertilizer for brain cells. The picture has grown more complicated since then, though, because when researchers ran similar trials in people whose memory was already failing, exercise didn't rescue their cognitive scores. That suggests movement works less like a treatment you reach for once something has gone wrong, and more like a deposit you make across decades, quietly building a reserve you'll be grateful for later. It's the quiet logic underneath this entire list. The earlier you begin, the more it's worth. Every night while you sleep, your brain does something that sounds almost too strange to be true. It cleans itself. Throughout the day, your neurons produce waste, and among that waste is a sticky protein called amyloid, the same substance that accumulates into the plaques found in Alzheimer's disease. And during the deepest stage of sleep, those heavy, dreamless hours early in the night, the brain effectively opens its drainage system and clears the amyloid away. Just how delicate that process is became clear when researchers selectively disrupted only the deep sleep stage in healthy adults for a single night, leaving the rest of their sleep intact, and found that by morning, the amyloid in their spinal fluid had measurably risen. What makes this genuinely unsettling is the way it compounds, since poor sleep lets amyloid accumulate. Accumulating amyloid further fragments deep sleep, and the two go on feeding each other in a loop that can run silently for years. Deep sleep is also when the brain consolidates the day's experiences into lasting memory, which is why information so often seems to evaporate after a bad night, having never been properly filed in the first place. None of the ways to protect it are glamorous. A cool and dark room, a schedule steady enough that your body can anticipate it, and real caution with alcohol late in the evening, which sedates you into sleep while quietly stripping out its deepest and most restorative stages. If you're finding this useful, subscribing is genuinely the one free thing that helps these videos keep coming. And now the habit I promised would catch you off guard, which is also the one that most reordered how I think about all of this. If you lined up every risk factor for dementia a person can actually change and ranked them by how much they matter in midlife, the one at the very top would not be diet or exercise or blood sugar. It would be hearing. Untreated hearing loss is the single largest modifiable risk factor for dementia, and almost no one realizes it, in part because the connection only makes sense once you trace it. When the sound reaching your brain is degraded, it has to spend extra effort simply decoding speech, effort drained away from thinking and remembering. And the strain of hearing also nudges people, slowly and almost imperceptibly, out of conversations and social life, a withdrawal that carries its own risk. There's even evidence that the regions of the brain devoted to processing sound begin to waste away when they're starved of clear input. Whether treating hearing loss can undo any of that is where the science turns genuinely nuanced. Because a large trial in 2023 followed nearly 1,000 older adults with untreated hearing loss and found that across the whole group, fitting hearing aids did not clearly slow 3 years of cognitive decline. Among the participants who started at higher risk, though, the ones who were older and already declining faster, treatment slowed that decline by roughly half, which means the benefit is conditional rather than universal. If your hearing is fading and your underlying risk is already elevated, addressing it may be one of the highest value things on this entire list. And it stays badly underused, since most people who would benefit from hearing aids never end up wearing them. Hearing reaches memory through the brain's wiring. The next factor reaches it through the plumbing. Your brain is extraordinarily hungry for blood, making up about 2% of your body weight while drawing close to 20% of your circulation. All of it delivered through a network of vessels so fine they make a human hair look thick. Sustained high blood pressure wears away at that fragile network year after year, scarring and starving small regions of tissue, and it becomes one of the most common routes to memory loss, precisely because it does its damage in silence, with no symptoms to raise the alarm. What makes it worth your attention is that it's one of the few risk factors you can read straight off a machine at any pharmacy and then actually change. And in one large trial, lowering blood pressure aggressively, rather than to the usual target, measurably reduced people's risk of mild cognitive impairment, the stage that so often comes just before dementia. A single number, checked and kept in line, turns out to be a dial on your future memory. Blood pressure is dangerous in the way boring things are dangerous, because nothing about it ever feels urgent. So it sits in the background for years, quietly making decisions about your brain on your behalf. Almost everyone has been sold the opposite of all this at some point, in the form of a brain training app or a daily puzzle promising that a few minutes of play will keep the years off your mind. And the research simply doesn't back that promise up. When you practice a brain training game, you do reliably get better at that game, and sometimes at tasks that closely resemble it. But the improvement stubbornly refuses to carry over to the memory you actually rely on to find your keys or follow an argument. You've trained one narrow skill, in much the way that endless hours on a single video game make you formidable at that one game, and nothing beyond it. There's no harm in any of that if you enjoy it. The only problem is the lab coat it tends to get dressed up in. What genuinely builds a brain that ages well is difficulty itself, the real and unfamiliar kind. Whether that's a new language, an instrument your fingers keep stumbling over, or any skill that asks more of you than you can comfortably give. Because that strain is what researchers mean by cognitive reserve, the buffer that helps explain how two brains with identical physical aging can end up so far apart, one still sharp and the other not. The thing to watch for is comfort, since a puzzle you've very nearly mastered has quietly stopped challenging you, and the challenge was always the point. So keep the crossword if it brings you joy, as long as you stop expecting it to protect you. The last habit is the one most likely to be waved off as sentimental, which the numbers make difficult to justify, because pooling dozens of long-term studies reveals that people with rich social lives carry roughly 19% lower odds of developing dementia, while loneliness on its own is tied to around 40% higher risk, an effect large enough to stand right beside the physical factors already covered. The reason is far less soft than it sounds, since holding a conversation is one of the most cognitively demanding things a person ever does. In real time and with no sense of effort at all, you're reading a face, predicting where a sentence is heading, retrieving what this person told you weeks ago, and holding the whole thread of a shared history. A complete mental workout hidden inside ordinary small talk. Remove it through isolation, and that workout simply stops, which is the precise point where hearing loss does its quietest harm. Because as conversations grow harder to follow, people gradually stop joining them, and the isolation finishes what the hearing decline started. So staying genuinely woven into other people's lives, even on the evenings when staying home would be easier, is doing real and measurable work inside your skull that you'll never directly feel. Looking back across the whole list, what stands out most is what never appears on it. No miracle berry, no $30 supplement, no proprietary secret. Just movement, sleep, hearing, blood pressure, learning, and connection. A collection of things so unremarkable they're easy to wave away, and largely ignored for that exact reason, because not one of them can be packaged and sold. None of it is a guarantee either. The evidence is real but modest, threaded with caveats and the occasional disappointing trial. And what it finally offers isn't certainty so much as better odds, the kind available to you at almost any age, and starting as soon as the next hour. Every study behind what I've told you is linked below with its identifier, because I'd far rather you check these claims than take them on faith. The brain you're protecting is the only one you'll ever get. And right now, at this very moment, it's sitting quietly behind your eyes, running absolutely everything you are. If you liked this video, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on more science-backed content.